In a world where voices breathe life into pages, welcome to Sparrow's Realm. The story begins.
Chapter 1. Lian poured tea with the same calm precision she'd always had. Her movements were graceful, but her eyes held a cool, clear light that hadn't been there in her youth. Yu, younger by a year, rested her chin on her hand, watching the petals drift into her cup. "You look different," Yu said finally, her tone soft but knowing. "So do you," Lian replied. "Death tends to smooth out the illusions, doesn't it?" They shared a small, wry smile. In their past lives, fate had handed them mismatched worlds. Lian meant for order, quiet strength, and structure had been married off to the Zhao clan, a family of merchants who prized noise and greed over honor. Their house had smelled of wine, their laughter had cut like knives, and by the time her hair had streaked with gray, Lian had learned to keep her voice still even when her heart screamed. Yu, meanwhile, had entered the elegant Pei family. Poets, scholars, refined to the point of suffocation. They praised silence, moderation, restraint until Yu herself became little more than a painting on their wall. She'd smiled until her heart withered. Now, reborn, they sat once more under the same apricot tree where their childhood laughter used to echo. The air smelled faintly of earth and memory. Yu spoke first. "In my last life, I thought gentleness was all it took to survive. I tried to fit their world, but I disappeared inside it." Lian stirred her tea, her expression unreadable. "And I thought reason could tame chaos. But I was only dragged into the mud with them." The apricot petals kept falling. Somewhere in the distance, a servant's bell rang, reminding them of the lives they were expected to step back into, the same arranged betrothals, the same futures. Then Yu looked up, her eyes catching Lian's. "Sister, what if we swapped?" Lian blinked, the idea landing between them like a spark in dry grass. Yu leaned forward, her voice almost playful. "You handle tempests better than I ever could. And the Pei family, you'd find peace among them. They'd never dare crush your kind of stillness." Lian's lips curved faintly. "And you, in the Zhao clan?" Yu grinned. "I can shout louder than half their merchants combined. Perhaps it's time they met a lady who doesn't faint at vulgarity." Silence stretched, soft and certain. Then Lian's smile deepened, slow and knowing. "Heaven gave us the wrong lessons, it seems." "Then let's copy each other's answers this time," Yu replied, lifting her cup in toast. The wind caught a flurry of petals, sending them spiraling between their laughter. And just like that, under the old apricot tree that had watched them grow and fall and rise again, the sisters quietly rewrote fate. This time, the world would learn what happened when the wrong women stepped into the right lives. Chapter 2. Lian arrived at the Zhao estate under a blazing morning sun, the air thick with the smell of roasting meat, spilled wine, and the faint tang of burnt oil. The courtyard rang with barking orders, clattering trays, and the boisterous laughter of merchants who treated honesty like a suggestion. Zhao Feng, eldest son and heir to the chaotic Zhao clan, met her at the entrance. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had the faintly wary air of a man accustomed to running a house that sometimes ran itself into the ground. "Welcome to your new home, Madame Zhao," he said, voice carefully neutral. Lian inclined her head gracefully, her dark eyes calm, betraying nothing of the unease she felt. Inside, the house was chaos made flesh. The second uncle shouted at a servant for a mislaid teacup, the matriarch leaned on her fan whispering gossip to any nearby ears, and the ledger's supposed records of wealth and trade sat misplaced on a side table, conveniently out of sight. She moved through the hall with deliberate ease, bowing to each family member, letting a faint, serene smile linger on her lips. It unnerved them more than anger would have. They weren't used to a bride who didn't stammer, flinch, or feign ignorance in the face of their antics. A young maid carrying a tray of dumplings tripped, sending a dish clattering to the floor. Before the uncle could raise his hand to strike, Lian stepped between them. Her voice was even, steady, almost casual. "A house that bruises its own hands will never hold wealth." For a moment, the room froze. Eyes widened. No one dared speak. Even Zhao Feng, leaning against the carved railing, felt a flicker of unease mixed with curiosity. "She's either fearless or foolish," he thought, noting how she had moved through the storm of noise with the poise of a woman born to command it. The rest of the household had no clue what to make of their new madam. She didn't shout, she didn't flinch, and she didn't play along with their petty games. Yet in her calm, measured way, she was already reshaping the house not with force, but with presence. As they dined later that evening, the cousins whispered to one another, glancing nervously at Lian. The matriarch attempted to needle her with questions, but each query was met with a smile so serene it cut sharper than any tongue could. Even Zhao Feng found himself silently admiring the strange authority she carried, quiet, unnerving, and absolute. For Xin Lian, the Zhao estate was a den of wolves. And she had arrived with nothing but her calm wit, her precise words, and the unspoken promise that this house would soon learn how to behave or bend under her steady hand. The game had begun. And she had all the cards. Chapter 3. For days, Xin Lian endured the Zhao household's petty cruelty. Cousins whispered behind her back, servants rolled their eyes, and a steady stream of laughter followed her through the halls. They tested her patience in every small way, convinced that their new madam would fold under ridicule. Then came the night that changed everything. A cousin, tipsy from the evening's wine, grabbed a maid by the sleeve, yanking her roughly as he laughed at her startled squeal. The room froze, not in fear of him, but because Lian walked toward the pair as if the world had slowed down just for her. No words. No warnings. Just measured steps, each one echoing softly against the wooden floor. When she reached him, her hand shot out once, connecting sharply with his cheek. He staggered back, crashing into a polished pillar with a gasp. A hush fell over the room. Lian's dark eyes met his. Calm. Steady. Deadly in its certainty. Touch her again, she said, her voice low and smooth, and you'll eat through a straw. The words carried no heat, no anger, yet they were more frightening than any shouting or fist. The cousins and servants, who had been sneering moments before, now watched in stunned silence. The new madam didn't need to raise her voice. She simply enforced the rules. Zhao Feng, standing in the doorway, stepped forward, attempting to intervene. Lian, that she turned slowly, her expression serene. Would you have preferred I let him finish? His mouth opened, then closed. No words came. He realized, for the first time, that she didn't fight with force alone, but with the quiet certainty that made even the boldest of men pause. From that night on, the household changed. Cousins straightened their shoulders, servants walked with less fear but more respect, and the whispers of mockery vanished. Lian's calm authority had been proven, she didn't need to shout or rage. A single measured act of justice, quiet, deliberate, and unstoppable, was enough to make the Zhao family remember who truly commanded the house. And Zhao Feng, watching her, could only admit to himself that he had never seen strength like this and that he was fortunate to witness it firsthand. Chapter 4. Xin Yu stepped into the Pei estate and felt the tension of her past life melt like morning mist. The hall smelled of sandalwood and fresh ink, the gardens were trimmed with care, and every corner of the house seemed to hum with quiet refinement. Here, music and poetry weren't just hobbies, they were a language, and you spoke it without effort. Pei Ming met her at the carved wooden gate, his dark eyes gentle, curious, and entirely open. Welcome home, he said softly, bowing with just enough formality to honor the moment. Yu smiled, folding her hands neatly. It feels right. From the very first day, her life here moved like a gentle river. They shared tea in the veranda's dappled sunlight, letting steam curl lazily between them as they spoke of books, poems, and minor anecdotes from the city. Walks through the bamboo groves became ritual, long strides side by side, laughter spilling softly at small jokes or awkward missteps. There was no need for grand gestures or dramatic declarations. A brush of the hand reaching for the same cup, a quiet teasing over a misread poem, or a shared glance at the garden's koi pond became the threads of a growing intimacy. Each day reinforced what both of them already felt: companionship, respect, and the slow, certain bloom of love. The Pei household seemed to respond to her presence. Servants walked with steadier steps, guests lingered longer to admire her composure, and even the sternest teachers of calligraphy couldn't help but smile when she recited verses. You fit into the rhythm of this refined world as naturally as a note in a song. Pei Ming, for his part, became increasingly helpless against her charm, not in the sense of vanity, but in quiet admiration. He watched the way she guided conversations, corrected mispronunciations in children's readings with patience, and encouraged the house's scholars with subtle praise. Slowly, he found himself drawn into her orbit, not by force, but by the ease of her presence. Twilight often found them on the veranda, soft lantern light spilling over teacups, the garden alive with the scent of jasmine. They spoke in whispers, sometimes about trivial things, sometimes about books, but always with a sense of ease neither had experienced before. Yu's heart, once confined by restraint and decorum, felt it could finally stretch and breathe. The Pei estate offered her a home where she could be herself, graceful, intelligent, lively, and entirely alive. It was the perfect counterpoint to Lian's fire, a reminder that gentleness, patience, and quiet competence could be just as powerful as discipline, command, and authority. Here, in the blooming gardens and candlelit rooms, Shin Yu had finally found the life she had always longed for and the love she had been reborn to enjoy. Chapter 5. Shin Lian spent her mornings wandering the warehouses of the Zhao estate, eyes sharp and calculating. She noticed the way the silk bolts didn't quite match fine threads blended with cheap substitutes, sold at the price of perfection. Every shipment that left the estate carried a small lie, a crack in the family's reputation. When she summoned the chief steward, Chen Lu, he leaned against the ledger desk, smirking. "Madam Zhao," he drawled, "you think a pretty face like yours can run a business?" Lian's expression remained serene, her gaze unflinching. "I don't think. I know." That night, the steward went to bed uneasy, but the next morning, the full weight of Lian's quiet authority struck the household. Chen Lu was found kneeling in the central courtyard, the thick ledger of fraudulent accounts balanced carefully on his bruised hands. Servants and cousins gathered, whispering nervously, while Lian stood nearby, her robe brushing the stone tiles with deliberate elegance. "Read them," she said softly, voice carrying across the hushed courtyard. "Every last entry." Chen Lu hesitated, but her gaze, steady and unyielding, left him no choice. Line by line, he read the falsified accounts aloud. Each misdeed, each cheapened bolt of silk, spilled from his lips, echoing in the courtyard. The assembled workers and relatives listened in stunned silence, the weight of Lian's calm authority pressing down on them more heavily than any shout could have. Even Zhao Feng, standing to the side, felt a flicker of something new, awe. He had married a woman of elegance and composure, but now he saw the strange, steady strength behind that refinement, a quiet force that could bend the most obstinate household to order without raising a hand beyond necessity. When Chen Lu finished reading, Lian approached him, her expression still calm, almost casual. "You will correct every shipment before it leaves this estate. Do not fail me again." "Yes, Madame Zhao," he whispered, voice trembling, aware that defiance was no longer an option. The workers began to murmur approval, the cousins shifted uneasily, and the matriarch's sharp eyes softened in grudging respect. Zhao Feng, still absorbing the scene, realized that Lian didn't need to yell or strike to command loyalty and fear. Her composure and intelligence did it all. That evening, as the sun set and lanterns were lit across the courtyard, Zhao Feng watched her move among the stacks of silk, checking threads with quiet precision. The house had been chaotic, corrupt, and careless, and now, under Lian's unspoken rule, it was beginning to bend toward order. For the first time, he understood what had always been there beneath her elegance, a strength that was patient, precise, and utterly unstoppable. The Zhao estate had a new madam, and everyone who had doubted her would remember her calm power for years to come. Chapter 6. The Zhao estate had never been quiet, but under Shin Lian's watch, it began to hum with a new rhythm. She tackled the chaos systematically. Fair wages were now non-negotiable, no worker went home short, and all complaints were heard and recorded. Daily ledgers, once tossed aside or misplaced, were now signed in ink under her gaze before any transaction could leave the house. The simple act of observation, the promise of accountability, changed the way the staff carried themselves. Even the older cousins, who had long considered themselves untouchable, began to check their behavior when she entered a room. Lian didn't stop at money. She invited local scholars to teach reading, writing, and poetry to the children of servants. In the process, she made allies out of the previously overlooked workers who now stood taller, children who recited verses with pride, and neighbors who began speaking respectfully of the Zhao household. Not everyone approved. The matriarch, ever sharp-tongued, decided to test Lian one evening at dinner. Leaning on her fan, she arched a brow. "A woman who lectures over silver and silk, surely you think yourself the moral compass of this house?" Lian's lips curved into a faint, serene smile. She set down her tea and spoke as if telling a quiet tale, yet every word carried weight. "I remember the story of a tiger who let rats live in its den. The tiger was strong, feared by all, yet it tolerated the smallest intruders until one day, the rats gnawed at its bones. Even the greatest strength must be maintained, or it crumbles from neglect." The hall fell silent. Forks hovered mid-air, cousins froze mid-laughter, and even the matriarch's sharp eyes softened, if only slightly. Zhao Feng, leaning against a pillar, covered a small smile with his hand, impressed as always by Lian's calm authority. From that night on, the household began to shift. Half of the clan grumbled behind closed doors, muttering about a new madam who was too strict, too clever, too fearless. But the other half, secretly, began to admire her, A woman who could command obedience without shouting, who could shape the chaos of a merchant family into something almost civilized. In the evenings, Zhao Feng would watch her move through the halls, arranging accounts, speaking to servants, and occasionally offering a soft word of encouragement to a frightened cousin. He realized that the calm authority she wielded wasn't taught, it was innate. Every step, every word, every quiet glance carried the weight of someone who had learned patience and precision from a life far harsher than most could imagine. By the end of the week, the estate had changed enough that visitors noticed. Orders were followed without shouting, work moved more smoothly, and laughter returned, tempered now, but warmer, steadier. The house that had once leaned on noise and chaos was learning discipline. And all it took was one quiet, unyielding madam. Zhao Feng, standing in the doorway, felt a swell of pride and a touch of awe. He knew the family would never forget who had truly tamed them. And for the first time, the Zhao estate seemed ready to bow not in fear, but in respect. Chapter 7 Night had wrapped the Zhao estate in a velvet hush, broken only by the occasional creak of a distant shutter. Lian had stayed late in the warehouse, inspecting silk bolts for the day's deliveries, when the sound of heavy footsteps reached her ears. A group of men hired by one of her disgruntled uncles, desperate to reclaim lost influence, slipped between the stacks, laughing quietly. They thought the new madam would scream, faint, or beg. They were wrong. Lian didn't move quickly. She didn't panic. She waited, letting the shadows stretch and the men grow confident. Then, when the nearest thug leaned forward, she picked up a lantern and swung it with calm precision. It smashed against his face, sending shards of glass sparkling across the floor. He staggered, clutching his cheek, stunned more by the quiet force behind the attack than by the pain. The remaining men froze. Lian stepped between them and the injured man, her dark eyes sweeping over each of them, unflinching. "I know every one of you," she said, voice low and steady. "Every favor owed, every debt unpaid, every corner of this city you hide in. And I know your faces. You will not touch this household or its people again." Fear rippled through the group. They dropped their weapons, stumbled over crates, and bolted into the night. Lian didn't pursue them. She simply straightened her robes, dusted off her hands, and surveyed the warehouse. Smoke curled faintly from the burnt lantern. Moments later, Zhao Feng arrived, alerted by the commotion. He found her perched calmly on a crate, hair slightly singed at the ends, a faint smile playing at her lips. "They dropped your family's good lanterns," she remarked lightly, as if the incident were little more than a minor inconvenience. Zhao Feng blinked, taking in the scene: shattered glass, toppled crates, the lingering smell of smoke, and Lian, calm, composed, and entirely unshaken. His respect for her deepened in that instant. For the first time, he realized that her strength didn't come from training or brute force. It came from patience, calculation, and an unshakable calm that could dismantle threats without raising her voice. From that night on, his tone toward her changed completely. There were no lectures, no attempts to moderate her actions. He simply observed, admired, and quietly acknowledged that the Zhao household had found its true backbone in Lian. And somewhere in the warehouse, the faint smell of burnt silk lingered, a reminder that the quietest fires could leave the deepest marks. Chapter 8 The sun spilled gold across the Zhao courtyard, brushing the polished tiles and silk-draped windows in warm light. Yu arrived with Pei Ming, their carriage rolling smoothly over the stone path. The Pei household had trained her in grace and subtlety, but the Zhao estate, once a cacophony of shouting merchants and careless cousins, now carried a disciplined rhythm, thanks to Lian's quiet authority. Lian greeted them at the garden gate, her posture straight but unstrained. She inclined her head, letting a faint smile curve her lips. "Sister," she said. Yu's face brightened instantly, the small crease at the corner of her eye showing genuine delight. "It's different here," she said, looking around. "But in a good way." They strolled down the flower-lined path, petals crunching softly under their feet. The garden seemed alive with laughter, not just from the sisters, but from the children of servants and cousins who had learned to move with care rather than chaos. "You look calmer," Yu said finally, her voice teasing but affectionate. Lian smirked faintly, tilting her head. "Beating people politely is therapeutic." Yu laughed, soft and melodic, and shook her head. "I think only you could call it that." Nearby, Zhao Feng and Pei Ming stood awkwardly by a small tea table, trying to navigate conversation. One was blunt and forthright, the other gentle and measured, their words tangled and twisted as they attempted to bridge the gap between houses, until both settled into a companionable silence, sipping tea and exchanging occasional glances. The sisters found a quiet spot beneath the apricot tree, petals drifting lazily in the breeze. They shared tea, talking quietly of the months past, of lessons learned, and of battles won not on battlefields, but in households that had once seemed impossible to tame. "You've done it," Yu said softly, watching the Zhao children run across the courtyard in orderly games. "You've rebuilt a house." Lian smiled, setting her cup down with care. "No," she corrected, a glint in her eye. "I reminded it who owned it." They laughed together, the sound carrying over the courtyards and gardens a gentle echo of two lives reclaimed. For the first time since their rebirths, both sisters felt at home. One in a world of quiet refinement, the other in a house once wild but now tamed, each thriving in the life they had chosen, each finally at peace with the turn their fate had taken. And as the sun lowered behind the apricot blossoms, petals falling like soft rain, the sisters sat side by side, sipping tea and sharing the rarest gift of all, laughter, pride, and the certainty that they had finally written their own destinies. Chapter 9. The morning dawned calm and bright, but the peace of the Zhao estate shattered within moments. A contingent of officials stormed through the gates, scrolls in hand and suspicion in their eyes. "Madame Zhao, you are accused of poisoning a rival merchant's shipment," the lead official declared, his voice cutting through the courtyard like a whip. Panic rippled instantly. Servants froze mid-step, cousins whispered nervously, and even Zhao Feng's confident posture faltered. He turned to Xin Lian, eyes wide. What is this?" Lian's gaze swept over the officials, calm as the surface of a still pond. She folded her hands neatly before her and stepped forward. "Shall we review the facts?" Her voice was smooth, measured, and utterly unshakable. The lead official sneered. "And what proof can you offer, young lady?" From within her quarters, Lian produced a stack of meticulously kept ledgers. Every trade, every shipment, every signature documented, cross-checked, and verified. She laid them carefully on the table, letting the weight of their precision speak for itself. "These are the true accounts of the Zhao estate," she said. "Every bolt of silk, every coin received or paid, witnessed by workers whose names are written here. They will testify that all transactions were lawful and honest." A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Lian's next move was quieter, but no less decisive. She handed over a neatly folded confession letter, tied with red ribbon. The steward, coerced weeks earlier into honesty, had admitted to falsifying records under the orders of a disgraced uncle aiming to frame her. The officials read, their frowns deepening, confusion and disbelief spreading across their faces. Zhao Feng watched silently, a swell of admiration rising in his chest. When the last line was read, Lian's eyes met the lead official's. "You will see that the accusation has no merit. Every claim against this house is false." The courtyard fell silent. Even the most skeptical officials had no choice but to accept the irrefutable evidence. Zhao Feng stepped forward, kneeling in the center of the courtyard, voice strong and clear. "Madame Zhao has preserved the honor of our house and safeguarded our name. I kneel to thank her." Lian inclined her head gracefully. "I only prepared for what could happen. It is the duty of a house to protect itself." That evening, as the estate settled into quiet again, Zhao Feng found her in their chambers. Lantern light glimmered on her calm face, hair slightly loose at the nape of her neck. He took a seat beside her. "When I first saw you," he said quietly, "I thought you were too still for this family. Too calm, too proper." Lian raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "But now," he continued, voice softening, "I see that stillness was exactly what we needed. You are the spine we were missing." She looked at him steadily, letting the words sink in. "And you," she replied, "are the one who allows that spine to straighten the house without fear." Outside, the Zhao estate hummed gently. Order had been restored, threats neutralized, and respect earned not by shouting or rage, but through foresight, preparation, and a quiet, unyielding strength. For the first time, Zhao Feng understood fully that Xin Lian was not just a bride, not just a madam, she was the unshakable force that held the entire house together. And for him, that realization came with awe, gratitude, and a deepening love that needed no words. Chapter 10. A year had passed, and the Zhao estate was almost unrecognizable not in structure, but in spirit. The red gates gleamed under the sun, the courtyard swept and shining, and the air smelled faintly of incense and freshly polished wood. Where chaos had once ruled, now there was rhythm, laughter, the patter of children learning their lessons, and the steady hum of honest trade. Xin Lian moved through the halls with the same calm authority that had tamed the household months before. Ledgers were checked and signed, deliveries inspected, and disputes settled fairly, yet firmly. Zhao Feng, by her side, ran the business with honesty and tact, his voice a gentle compliment to her quiet strength. Even the cousins and servants moved with a newfound confidence, carrying themselves with pride instead of fear. In the courtyard, children practiced calligraphy and poetry under the watchful eyes of tutors Lian had invited. Their laughter rang clear, mingling with the soft notes of a guqin from the veranda. The Zhao household, once infamous for its rowdiness and corruption, now thrived on discipline, respect, and a subtle warmth that only true leadership could bring. Across town, the Pei family glimmered with a different kind of perfection. Yu presided over poetry gatherings, the gentle air of the house reflecting her own grace and intelligence. Pei Ming sat beside her, admiring how naturally she moved through the world, drawing people in with charm and elegance. Guests whispered of the ideal couple, though the truth was simpler, they were happy, and that happiness radiated outward. One afternoon, the sisters met again beneath the apricot tree, the petals floating lazily down around them. Yu's eyes traced the calm lines of Lian's face, the poised figure who had transformed chaos into order. "You rebuilt a house," she said softly, half in awe, half in admiration. Lian tilted her head, a faint smile on her lips. "No," she corrected lightly. "I reminded it who owned it." Yu laughed, and Lian's smile deepened. They shared tea under the blossoms, petals drifting into their cups, and the sound of their quiet laughter filled the air. Around them, life in both households continued, full of warmth, energy, and peace, the result of years of mistakes learned from and lessons applied. Zhao Feng and Pei Ming attempted conversation nearby, two very different men awkwardly bridging the worlds their wives had chosen. The sisters watched them, amused but content, knowing that their own paths had been carefully chosen and well walked. As the sun sank behind the apricot branches, painting the gardens in golden shadow, Lian and Yu sat side by side. 2 lives of missteps, heartbreak, and rebirth had led them here, to a moment where laughter, love, and respect reigned supreme. The world beyond the estates would continue in chaos and noise, but beneath the apricot tree, peace had taken root. And for the sisters, that was more than enough.
If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more tales from Sparrow's Realm. Until next time, keep listening, and let your imagination soar.